"Sir, she did something to your cake," whispered the beggar boy to the millionaire. Richard Parker felt his heart race as he stared at the perfectly decorated chocolate cake on the bakery counter. This was his daughter Emily's birthday cake, specially ordered for her sweet 16 party happening that very night. Just then, he felt a delicate touch on his arm. He turned and saw a boy around 12 years old, thin, wearing a worn brown cap and simple clothes that had seen better days. "Sir, she did something to your cake," whispered the boy, leaning close to Richard's ear with an urgency that sent a chill down his spine. Richard glanced around the elegant Sweet Charm Bakery, located in the upscale Upper East Side neighborhood of New York City. The golden pendant lights overhead created a cozy atmosphere, but at that moment he felt completely uneasy. "What are you talking about, boy?" Richard asked quietly, trying not to draw attention from the other customers. "With that lady over there," Michael discreetly pointed to Karen, the baker with her brown hair tied in a bun, who was arranging some pastries behind the counter. "I saw her put something inside your cake, something that wasn't sugar or chocolate." Richard felt a knot in his stomach. As a successful businessman in the construction industry, he was used to tense situations, but this caught him completely off guard. "Are you sure about what you're saying?" he whispered. "I am, sir. I work here cleaning tables and sweeping the floor. Mrs. Mary lets me stay in exchange for a few coins and a snack at the end of the day. I saw everything." Richard studied the boy more closely. Michael had large, expressive eyes, and despite the simplicity of his clothes, there was a clear intelligence in his gaze. His small hands trembled slightly, as if he were nervous about speaking up. "And why are you telling me this?" Richard asked. "Because you seem like a good person, and because I don't like it when people do bad things." Just then, Karen approached the counter where the cake was, carrying a special box decorated with golden ribbons. "Mr. Parker, your cake is ready. It was a pleasure working on this special order," she said with a smile that now seemed forced to Richard. He looked at the cake again. It was truly a work of art. 3 tiers of chocolate cake, covered in velvety ganache and decorated with delicate handmade sugar roses. At the top, the number 16 shimmered in gold. "Thank you, Karen, it really is beautiful," Richard replied, trying to keep his voice steady. As Karen carefully transferred the cake into the box, Richard noticed her hands were trembling slightly, too. She avoided looking directly at him, focusing only on the task. Michael lingered nearby, pretending to clean an already spotless table. Richard realized the boy was watching Karen's every move intently. "The bill was already paid in advance," Karen said, sealing the box carefully. "I hope your daughter likes it." "I'm sure Emily will be delighted," Richard replied, taking the box. At that moment, a terrible doubt began to grow in his mind. Emily was everything to him. After losing his wife in a car accident 3 years earlier, his daughter had become his only reason for living. The Sweet 16 party had been planned for months, and Emily was glowing with happiness. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Richard left the bakery carrying the box, but stopped outside when he realized Michael had followed him. "Sir, is there anything else you need to know?" said the boy, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "What else did you see, Michael?" "The lady Karen was crying while she made your cake, and she kept checking her phone the whole time, like she was talking to someone who was telling her to do it." Richard felt the world spin. He carefully placed the box on the back seat of his black Mercedes and turned to the boy. "Michael, can you show me exactly what you saw?" "Yes, sir, but not here on the street. Too many people are passing by." Richard looked around. Madison Avenue was busy that Saturday afternoon, with people going in and out of shops. He needed to understand what was happening, but he also couldn't be too late. The party would start at 7, and he still had to go home to change and help with the final preparations. "Where can we talk?" Richard asked. "There's a square up ahead, sir. We can sit on a bench and I'll tell you everything properly." Richard hesitated for a moment. Should he trust a street kid? On the other hand, Michael didn't seem to have any reason to lie, and if there really was something wrong with the cake, he needed to find out before the party. All right, let's go. They walked to the small square a few blocks from the bakery. It was a tree-lined space with scattered benches where people often rested during lunch. At this time of day, it was mostly empty. Richard sat on a wooden bench, placing the cake box carefully beside him. Michael sat at the other end, keeping a respectful distance. "Now tell me everything you saw," Richard said. Michael took a deep breath before speaking. "I was sweeping near the kitchen when I heard Miss Karen answer the phone. She got really nervous and started crying quietly. Then she went to the fridge and took out a small clear jar with some liquid inside." "What kind of liquid?" "I don't know, sir. It was kind of yellowish. She stared at the jar for a long time like she was deciding whether to use it or not. Then the phone rang again, and she answered quickly." Michael paused, as if recalling the exact details. "She was whispering, but I heard her say, 'I don't want to do this, please.' And then, 'Fine, I'll do it.'" Richard's stomach twisted. This was sounding worse by the minute. "And then she went to where your cake was. It was almost finished. She made a tiny hole at the bottom, poured in the liquid from the jar, and covered the hole with a bit of frosting. She did it really fast, like she was in a hurry." "Are you absolutely sure about what you saw?" "Yes, sir. I was hiding behind some ingredient boxes, but I could see everything. She didn't notice me." Richard looked at the box beside him. On the outside, the cake looked perfect, but now he was certain something was very wrong. "Michael, do you know who could be forcing Karen to do this?" "I don't know, sir, but she seemed really scared. And when you came to pick up the cake, she got even more nervous." Richard pulled out his phone and checked the time. It was 4:30. The party would start in 2.5 hours, and the guests were probably already getting ready. Emily was at home with her friends, putting the final touches on everything. He had to make a quick decision. He couldn't take that cake home without knowing what was inside, but he also couldn't just cancel his daughter's Sweet 16 party at the last minute. "Michael, do you know any place where I can take this cake to get it tested?" "Tested how, sir?" "To find out what was put inside it." Michael thought for a moment. "My older brother, Christopher, works at a clinical lab nearby. Maybe he can help." "Where is this lab located?" "On Lexington Avenue, sir. About 6 blocks from here. But I'm not sure if he'll be working today. It's Saturday." Richard Parker stood up from the bench, carefully picking up the box. "Let's go there. Can you take me?" "Yes, sir, but can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why would anyone want to harm you?" The question hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He was a successful businessman, but had always tried to run his affairs honestly. Sure, there was competition in the construction industry, but he never imagined someone would go so far as to poison his daughter's birthday cake. "I don't know, Michael, but that's exactly what I need to find out." They began walking toward the lab. Richard carried the cake box as if it were a bomb that could explode at any moment. Michael walked beside him, pointing the way. As they moved, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Emily. She had been so happy about the party. She had picked out her dress weeks in advance, a light blue taffeta creation that made her look like a princess. The guests included her school friends, some cousins, and the family's closest friends. "Sir," Michael said, interrupting his thoughts, "can you tell me about your daughter?" Richard smiled for the first time since leaving the bakery. "Emily is a special girl, very bright, always reading a book. She wants to study medicine after high school. She takes after her mother a lot." "Her mother won't be at the party." Richard's chest tightened. "Her mother hasn't been with us for a few years now." Michael didn't ask further, seeming to understand it was a delicate subject. They arrived at Vital Diagnostics, a small 2-story building with a simple facade. The ground floor housed the reception and sample collection area, while the second floor contained the actual labs. "There's my brother," Michael said, pointing to a young man around 25 who was leaving the building. Christopher was taller than Michael but had the same expressive eyes. He wore a white lab coat and carried a backpack. "Christopher," Michael called. The young man looked their way and approached, clearly surprised to see his brother with a well-dressed man holding a cake box. "Michael, what are you doing here? And who is this gentleman?" "Christopher, this is Mr. Parker. He needs your help." "With something very important." Richard extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Christopher. Your brother told me you work here at the lab. Yes, sir. I'm a clinical lab technician, but the lab is closed today. It's Saturday. I know it's an unusual request, Richard said, but I need you to analyze this cake. I have reason to believe there might be something dangerous in it. Christopher looked at the box, then at Michael, as if trying to make sense of the situation. What kind of dangerous substance? I'm not sure, but someone saw the baker pour a strange liquid into it. And why would anyone do that? That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out. Christopher glanced again at Michael, who nodded in confirmation. My brother doesn't lie, Christopher said. If he says he saw something, he really saw it. Richard felt relief as he realized Christopher was taking this seriously. Can you run the test today? Yes. I have a key because sometimes I come in on weekends to finish urgent tests, but it'll take at least 2 hours for preliminary results. Richard checked his watch again. It was 5:10 p.m. If the analysis took 2 hours, it would be past 7 in the evening by the time we got the results. The party would have already started. It's not a problem. I need to know what's in this cake, even if it's late. All right, let's go up. They entered the building and climbed the stairs to the second floor. Christopher opened the lab door and turned on the lights, revealing a modern space equipped with various machines Richard couldn't identify. First, I need to collect a sample of the cake, said Christopher, putting on gloves and picking up some sterile instruments. Richard carefully opened the box. The cake was still perfect, with no visible signs of tampering. Christopher used a special syringe to take a small sample from inside the cake, exactly where Michael had said Karen made the tiny hole. Now I'll prepare the sample for analysis. You can wait in the room next door. There are some chairs there. Richard and Michael settled into the small waiting area. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of lab equipment. Mr. Richard, said Michael, do you think you'll be able to throw another party for your daughter if this cake really is compromised? Richard had thought about that too. Even if he could get another cake, how would he explain to Emily and the guests what had happened? I'll figure it out, Michael. Emily can't miss her sweet 16. If you'd like, I can help. I know a few bakeries that can whip up a cake real quick. Richard looked at the boy and felt immense gratitude. Michael barely knew him, but was willing to help however he could. Thank you, Michael. You've already helped me so much. Just then, Richard's phone rang. It was Emily. Dad, where are you? It's past 5, and you said you'd be home by 5 to help me with my hair. Richard's heart sank. Emily was so excited for the party, and here he was in a lab discovering someone might have tried to poison her cake. Sweetheart, there's a small issue with the cake. I'll be a little late, but I'll be there soon. What kind of issue, Dad? Nothing too serious. The bakery just needed to make some final adjustments. Richard hated lying to Emily, but he couldn't tell her the truth over the phone. Okay, Dad, but don't take too long. The girls are already here, and the makeup artist is coming at 6. I'll do my best to get there soon, honey. Richard hung up and turned to Michael. My daughter's worried. I should be home helping her get ready. Do you want me to go to your house and let her know you're okay? No, Michael. But thank you for offering. They kept waiting. Richard tried to stay calm, but his mind wouldn't stop racing. Who would want to hurt him through his daughter? And why target her sweet 16 of all things? At 6 in the evening, Christopher appeared in the waiting room with a serious expression. I found something, he said. Richard stood up immediately. What did you find? There's a substance in the cake that shouldn't be there. It appears to be a sedative, but in a very high concentration. A sedative? Yes. If someone ate a normal slice of this cake, they'd likely pass out within minutes, and depending on their weight, it could be very dangerous. Richard's legs felt weak. Someone had actually tried to drug his daughter and the party guests. Are you sure? Absolutely. I'll keep a sample as evidence in case you want to file an official report. Richard sat back down, trying to process the information. Michael stepped closer and put a hand on his shoulder. Mr. Richard, at least now we know your daughter is safe. Michael was right, but Richard still had so many unanswered questions. Who had forced Karen to do this? And why? Christopher, can you store this cake as evidence too? Of course, I'll seal everything properly. Richard looked at his watch. 6:15 in the evening. There was still time to find another cake and save Emily's party, but first, he needed to understand what was happening. Michael, you said Karen seemed to be under threat. Do you think she's still at the bakery? I don't know, sir, but Mrs. Susan usually stays late on Saturdays. Let's go back. I need to talk to them. Christopher finished storing the evidence and the three left the lab. On the way back to the bakery, Richard tried calling Emily again, but she didn't answer. She was probably busy getting ready. When they arrived at Sweet Charm, they saw the bakery was still open, but there were few customers. Through the window, they spotted Karen arranging some pastries at the counter. She seemed calmer than before. I'll go in alone first, Richard said. You two wait outside. Richard entered the bakery and went straight to the counter where Karen was working. When she saw him, she visibly tensed up again. Mr. Parker? Did something happen with the cake? Karen, I need to talk to you about something very serious. The baker glanced around as if searching for a way to escape. What are you talking about? I know you put something in my cake, and I know someone forced you to do it. Karen turned pale. Her hands began trembling again, and she gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. I don't know what you're talking about. Karen, I'm not here to hurt you, but I need to know who made you do this and why. Tears welled up in the baker's eyes. Sir, I can't say anything. Please, just forget about it. I can't. Forget. You tried to poison my daughter's sweet 16 cake. I need to know why. At that moment, a woman around 50 stepped out from the kitchen. It was Susan, the bakery owner, a petite woman with gray hair and an apron covered in flour. What's going on here? She asked. Mrs. Susan, Karen said, still shaking. Mr. Parker is saying I put something in his cake. Susan looked from Richard to Karen, clearly trying to make sense of the situation. Mr. Parker, could you explain what's happening? Richard took a deep breath. He liked Susan, who was known in the neighborhood for making the best pastries around. He decided to tell the truth. Mrs. Susan, someone saw Karen putting a strange substance in my daughter's cake. I had it analyzed and it confirmed there's a powerful sedative in it. Susan was shocked. Karen, is this true? The baker burst into tears. Mrs. Susan, I didn't want to do it, but they said they'd hurt my son if I didn't. Richard felt a mix of anger and pity. Karen was a victim in this too. Who are they? Karen? I can't say, sir. They'll kill me if they find out I talked. Susan stepped closer and wrapped an arm around Karen. Karen, you've worked here for 5 years. You've always been honest. If someone threatened you, we'll find a way to fix this. Mrs. Susan, they have pictures of my son leaving school. They said they know where he lives with my mother. Richard sat in one of the bakery chairs. The situation was getting more complicated. Karen, how did they contact you? By phone. It started last week. A man called saying he knew I worked here and offered me a chance to make a lot of money. And you agreed? At first I thought it was just some extra work. He said I just needed to add a special ingredient to a specific cake. He offered $5,000. Richard shook his head. $5,000 was a lot of money for a baker, especially a single mother like Karen. When did you realize it wasn't something right? When he brought me the jar with the liquid. He said it was a kind of relaxing medicine, but that I couldn't tell anyone. That's when I tried to back out, but he said it was already too late. And that's when he threatened your son? Yes. He showed me pictures of Gabriel leaving school, playing at the park near our house. Said if I didn't do what he was telling me, my son would have problems. Susan was visibly outraged. Karen, you should have told me. We could have gotten help. Mrs. Susan, I was so scared. And they said if I told anyone, they'd hurt Gabriel right away. Richard stood up and began pacing back and forth in the bakery, trying to gather his thoughts. Karen, this man who called you, did he give his name? No, sir, he just said he was a friend of someone who knows you. A friend of someone who knows me. That's right, he knew a lot about you. Knew today was your daughter's 15th birthday. Knew you always buy cakes from this bakery, even knew what time you'd come to pick it up. Richard felt a chill. That meant someone very close to him was involved. What else did he know about me? He knew you lost your wife a few years ago. Knew Miss Emily is your only daughter. Even knew the names of some people who'd be at the party tonight. Richard sat back down, feeling betrayed. Only those very close to him knew all these details. About his personal life. Karen, can you remember any specific names he mentioned? Let me think. Karen wiped her tears with a napkin. He talked about someone called Uncle Edward, said he'd be at the party. Richard froze. Edward was his younger brother, and he was indeed one of the party guests. But why would someone want to use Edward to get to him? What else did he say about Edward? That Uncle Edward would be very happy to see you and your daughter relaxed at the party. Richard stood up abruptly. That phrase had a sinister tone that made him realize the situation was even more serious than he'd thought. Karen, do you still have the phone number he used to call you? Yes, sir. It's saved in my phone. Karen grabbed her phone and showed Richard the number. He wrote it down and immediately dialed from his own phone. The number's out of service, Richard said after a few tries. Susan, who had stayed silent listening to the whole conversation, finally spoke. Mr. Parker, I think we need to call the police. No, Karen said quickly. They said if I involved the police, they'd hurt Gabriel right away. Richard checked his watch. 6:45 in the evening. The party would start in 15 minutes and he still wasn't home. Karen, where's your son now? With my mother, at her house. It's in Queens. Can you call there and make sure everything's okay? Karen picked up the phone with trembling hands and dialed her mother. Mom, how's Gabriel? There was a pause. Are you sure he's right there with you? Another pause. Okay, Mom, don't leave the house today, please. I'll explain later. Karen hung up. Gabriel's fine. He's watching TV with my mom. Richard felt a small relief, but he knew the situation wasn't resolved yet. Karen, did this man say when he'd call again? He said he'd call tonight to see if I'd kept my part of the deal. What time? At 8 o'clock. Richard looked at his watch again. It was just over an hour left. He needed to be home for the party, but he also couldn't leave. Karen and her son in danger. Mrs. Mary, can you close the bakery early today? We can, but why? Because I think it would be safer if Karen didn't stay here alone when that man calls. Richard grabbed his phone and called Emily again. This time she answered right away. Dad, where are you? The party's already started and you're not here yet. Emily, sweetheart, there's been a serious problem with the cake. I'll be there in a few minutes, but without the cake. Without the cake? Dad, you can't do this to me. It's my sweet 16. Richard's heart broke, hearing the distress in his daughter's voice. Honey, I promise I'll explain everything when I get there. Can you ask the guests to wait a little longer? Dad, people are already here. The catering is being served. How am I supposed to explain there's no cake? Emily, please, trust me. I'll fix this. Dad, you're scaring me. What really happened? Richard didn't know what to say. He couldn't tell Emily over the phone that someone had tried to poison her cake. Sweetheart, just give me half an hour. I promise I'll make it right. Emily started crying on the other end. Dad, I've waited my whole life for this party. It can't fall apart like this. It won't, darling. Daddy will do everything to fix it. Richard hung up, feeling awful. He'd promised Emily her sweet 16 would be perfect, and now everything was falling apart. Mr. Richard, said Michael, who had entered the bakery during the call. My brother Christopher had an idea. There's a bakery 2 blocks from here that does last-minute cakes. He knows the owner. Richard looked at Michael with hope. Could they make a cake in half an hour? They can, sir. It won't be as decorated as the other one, but it'll be delicious. How much would it cost? Christopher already spoke to them. Since it's an emergency, they charge $300, but it can be ready in 20 minutes. Richard took out his wallet and handed over the money immediately. Michael, can you go there with them now? Of course, sir. And I'll come too, said Susan. I know the owner of Honey and Cinnamon. He's a competitor, but he's an honest man. I'll help explain the situation. Richard felt immense gratitude for these people he barely knew, all willing to help him. And me? Asked Karen. What do I do when that man calls? Karen, you'll tell him the cake was delivered normally and that Mr. Parker didn't suspect. Okay thing. But what if he finds out the cake was sent for testing? Richard thought for a moment. He has no way of knowing, and even if he suspects, you'll say you held up your end of the deal and want the money you were promised. Do you think it'll work? Let's hope so, but either way I'll make sure you and your son stay safe. Susan locked up the bakery and they all left together. Richard felt a mix of anxiety and hope. At least now he had a plan to save. Emily's party, but he still needed to figure out who was behind it all. Christopher met them at the door of Honey and Cinnamon. The owner, a kind man named Anthony, was already preparing a simple but well-made chocolate cake. "It'll be ready in 20 minutes, said Anthony. "It won't have fancy decorations, but it'll be tasty." "Thank you so much," said Richard. "You're saving my daughter's party." While they waited for the cake to finish, Richard took the chance to call Edward, his brother. "Edward, are you at the party yet?" "I am, Richard, but where are you? Emily's really upset." "I'm handling an issue with the cake. I'll be there soon." "Edward, can I ask you something strange?" "Of course." "Did you tell anyone about Emily's party? Any specific details, like the time, the guests, that sort of thing?" "I did. Why?" Richard felt his stomach twist. "Who did you tell?" "Martin, my business partner. He asked what I was doing this weekend, so I mentioned the party." "Why, Richard? Is there a problem?" Richard knew Martin Sullivan, Edward's partner in a digital marketing firm. He always seemed like a serious person, but Richard had never interacted much with him. "Edward, do you think Martin might have any reason to want to harm me?" "Richard, what kind of strange question is that? Martin barely knows you, and even if he did, why would he want to harm you?" "I don't know. I'm just trying to make sense of something that happened." "What thing, Richard? You're worrying me." Richard decided not to share the details over the phone. "I'll explain later. Just confirm one thing for me. Are you sure you only told Martin?" "I'm sure. Richard, are you okay?" "I'm fine. I'll be there in a few minutes." Richard hung up and turned to the others. "I need to look into someone. My brother told his partner, a man named Martin Sullivan, about the party." "Do you think it could be him?" Michael asked. "I don't know yet, but it's the only lead I have right now." Anthony finished the cake and placed it in a simple box. It didn't have the elaborate decorations of the original cake, but at least it looked nice and smelled wonderful. "All done," Anthony said. "I hope your daughter likes it." "I'm sure she will. Thank you so much." Richard paid for the cake and turned to the others. "Now I need to head home. Karen, would you like me to take you somewhere safe before you go back?" "No, sir. I'll be staying at Mrs. Susan's place tonight. She lives near the bakery and has an alarm system." "Good idea. And you have my phone number. If that man calls and says anything strange, call me immediately." "All right, Mr. Richard." Richard said goodbye to everyone and hurried to his car. It was 7:20 p.m. He was an hour and 20 minutes late for his own daughter's party. On the drive home to Scarsdale, Richard tried to organize his thoughts. Martin Sullivan was the only name he had so far, but it still didn't make sense. Why would his brother's partner want to drug him and Emily? When he arrived home, Richard saw the backyard lit up and decorated with golden lights. Through the windows, he could see guests chatting and laughing. Emily had insisted on a garden party, and the result was beautiful. Richard entered through the front door carrying the box with the new cake. Emily ran to him as soon as she saw him. "Dad, finally! I was so worried." Emily looked stunning in her light blue dress. Her makeup was flawless, and her hair was styled elegantly with small flowers. "Sorry I'm late, sweetheart. There was a problem with the original cake, but I fixed it." "What kind of problem?" Richard glanced around and saw some guests approaching to greet him. "I'll tell you later. Let's enjoy your party now." Emily opened the box and saw the simple cake. "It's different from what I picked," she said, trying to hide her disappointment. "I know, honey, but I'm sure it's delicious." Edward walked up to them. "Richard, glad you made it. People were asking about you." "Edward, after the party, I need to talk to you about something important." "Sure, but first, let's sing happy birthday to this princess here." The guests gathered around the table where Richard had placed the cake. Emily made a wish and blew out her 15 candles as everyone sang. Richard tried to focus on the party and Emily's happiness, but he couldn't stop thinking about the situation. At any moment, Karen would receive the call from the man blackmailing her. "Dad, are you okay?" asked Emily. "You seem worried." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little tired." "Aren't you going to cut the cake?" Richard picked up the knife and began slicing the cake. Each piece he cut reminded him of the poisoned cake now in the lab as evidence. The guests started serving themselves and complimented the taste. At least Anthony had done an excellent last-minute job. Richard stepped away from the crowd and took the opportunity to observe the guests. There were about 30 people, family, and close friends. If the original plan had worked, all those people would be passing out right now. At exactly 8 o'clock, Richard's phone rang. It was Karen. "Mr. Richard," he called. "What did he say?" "He asked if I'd done what he told me." I said yes. "Then he asked if you suspected anything." "And what did you say?" "That you took the cake like normal and seemed really happy with it." "And then?" "He said he'd call me tomorrow to arrange where I'd pick up the money." "Anything else?" "Yes." "He asked what time the party would end." Richard felt a chill. "Why does he want to know that?" "I don't know, sir. I asked, but he just said it was to finish the job." Richard looked around the party. Everyone was enjoying themselves, unaware of the danger they'd narrowly escaped. "Karen, are you safe there at Mrs. Susan's house?" "Yes, sir. She locked everything and turned on the alarm." "Good. Tomorrow we'll find out who's behind all this." Richard hung up and returned to the party, but he couldn't focus. He watched every movement of the guests, trying to spot anyone acting strangely. Around 9 o'clock, Edward approached him. "Richard, can you explain now why you asked me those strange questions about Martin?" Richard glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Edward, let's talk inside." They went into the house and headed to Richard's office. "Edward, someone tried to poison Emily's party cake." Edward's eyes widened. "Poison? How?" Richard told the whole story, from when Michael warned him, at the bakery to the lab analysis. "My God, Richard, and you think Martin could be involved?" "I don't know. But he was the only person, besides our family, who knew specific details about the party." "Richard, that doesn't make sense. Why would Martin want to hurt you and Emily?" "That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out." "Edward, can you tell me more about him? How long have you been partners?" "About 2 years. We started the company together when I left the multinational. He always seemed like an honest guy." "Has he ever shown interest in my business?" "Not that I recall. In fact, he rarely asks about our family. He's more focused on work." Richard sat in the chair behind his desk. "Edward, I need your help investigating this." "Of course, Richard. What do you want me to do?" "Tomorrow, I want you to talk to Martin casually. Try to find out what he did today, if he asks anything about the party, that kind of thing." "Okay, but Richard, what if it's not him?" "Then we'll have to look for other clues, but for now it's all we have." They returned to the garden, where the party was still lively. Emily was dancing with her friends and seemed to be having a great time. Richard tried to enjoy the rest of the evening, but he couldn't shake the image of Emily, and all the guests passed out on the ground. If it weren't for Michael's courage to speak up about what he had seen, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Around 11 at night, the guests began to leave. Emily was radiant, thanking everyone for coming. "Dad, it was the best party ever," she said, hugging Richard. "I'm glad you enjoyed it, sweetheart. The cake was delicious, even though it was different from the one I had chosen." Richard smiled, thinking about how that last-minute cake swap had saved everyone's lives. After the last guest left and Emily went upstairs to her room, Richard stood alone in the garden, staring at the table where the replacement cake had been served. If the criminal's plan had succeeded, he and Emily would probably be in the hospital right now. Richard picked up his phone and called Christopher, Michael's brother. "Christopher, did you finish the full analysis of the cake?" "Yes, Mr. Parker. The amount of sedative was extremely high. If someone had eaten a normal slice, they would have been unconscious for at least 6 hours. And could it have been worse? Depending on the person's age and weight, yes, especially for children or the elderly." Richard thanked Christopher and hung up. Now he was certain. He needed to find out who was behind this and make sure they faced justice. On Sunday morning, Richard woke up early. Emily was still asleep, exhausted after the party. He took the opportunity to call Karen. "How are you?" "Karen?" "I'm fine, Mr. Parker. I spent the night at Mrs. Susan's house. My son is doing well, too." "Good. Today we're going to figure out who's behind all this." "How, sir?" "My brother is going to talk to someone who might be involved. Depending on what he finds out, we'll take the next steps." Richard hung up and got ready to leave. He had arranged to meet Edward at 10 that morning at a cafe near his office. When he arrived, Edward was already there, looking uneasy. "Richard, I called Martin this morning." "And?" I asked how his weekend was. He said he stayed home, but when I mentioned that Emily's party went great, he asked some strange questions. Richard leaned forward. What kind of questions? He asked if a lot of people had eaten the cake, if anyone had gotten sick during the party, things like that. That's very suspicious, Edward. I know, and there's more. When I said you'd been delayed because of a problem with the cake, he got visibly uncomfortable. Uncomfortable how? He started asking more questions, what kind of problem it was, if you'd switched bakeries, if the cake was from a specific place. Richard felt they were on the right track. Edward, do you think he might have a personal reason for wanting to hurt me? Richard, there's something I never told you. About 6 months ago, Martin asked me if you'd be interested in selling your construction company. What? He said he knew some investors who'd be willing to pay top dollar for an established firm like yours. And what did you say? That you'd never sell, it's your life's work. And even if you did, you wouldn't need middlemen. Richard began to understand the possible motive. Edward, do you think Martin could be working for someone who wants to force me to sell my company? It's possible. If you were incapacitated, for some reason, someone might try to convince Emily to sell the company to cover debts or something. Richard felt anger and fear at the same time. Parker Construction was extremely valuable, and he had turned down multiple buyout offers over the years. Edward, I need you to set up a meeting with Martin today. Tell him you want to discuss a new project. Richard, this could be dangerous. I'm not going alone. I'm taking someone with me. Richard picked up his phone and called Christopher. Christopher, can you do me one more favor? Of course, Mr. Parker. Can you come with me to a meeting today? I need a witness for a conversation that might be important. Sure, what time? I'll pick you up at 2 in the afternoon. Richard hung up and turned to Edward. Schedule. The meeting for 3 o'clock. And Edward, it's very important that you act normal. Don't let on that you know anything. All right, Richard. But I still think we should call the police. First, I need to be sure it's him. If we call the police without enough proof, he might run, and we'll never find out who else is involved. Edward called Martin and scheduled the meeting for 3 o'clock at their company's office. Richard went home to pick up Christopher and prepare for the confrontation. At 2 in the afternoon, Richard picked up Christopher at his house. On the way, he explained the plan. Christopher, I want you to record the entire conversation on your phone. If Martin is really involved, we'll need the recording as proof. Understood, Mr. Parker. What if he denies everything? I'll ask specific questions about things only the person who planned the poisoning would know. They arrived at Edward's company office at exactly 3 o'clock. It was a modern commercial building in Midtown Manhattan. Edward greeted them at reception and led them to the meeting room. Martin Sullivan was a man around 40, well-dressed with graying hair at his temples. When he saw Richard walk in with Christopher, he seemed surprised. Richard, good to see you. Edward said he wanted to discuss a project, but he didn't mention you'd be coming. Martin, we actually need to talk about something else. Martin looked from Richard to Edward, clearly confused. What's this about? Richard sat at the table and motioned for Christopher to do the same. Martin, someone tried to poison my daughter's birthday cake yesterday. Martin paled but tried to keep his composure. My God, Richard, that's terrible. How did you find out? Martin, did you call a baker named Karen last week? Me? No, Richard. Why would I do that? Richard watched Martin's reaction closely. He was clearly nervous, fidgeting with his hands and avoiding eye contact. Martin, the baker was forced to put sedatives in my daughter's cake. The person who did it knew very specific details about the party, details you learned from Edward. Richard, are you accusing me of trying to poison your daughter? That's absurd. Edward, who had been quiet until then, spoke up. Martin, you asked me some very strange questions this morning about the party. Why did you want to know if people had eaten the cake? Martin began sweating visibly. I was just being polite, asking how the party went. Richard leaned forward. Martin, you offered to broker a sale of my company to some investors a few months ago. Who are those investors? Richard, that has nothing to do with what happened yesterday. It has everything to do with it. If Emily and I had been hospitalized from poisoning, someone could have tried to force the sale while we were incapacitated. Martin stood up from his chair. Richard, I'm not staying here to listen to these ridiculous accusations. Martin, sit down, Richard said firmly. We're not done talking. You can't force me to stay. Christopher, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Mr. Sullivan, you know attempted poisoning is a serious crime, right? Martin looked at Christopher as if seeing him for the first time. And who are you? I'm a clinical lab technician. I'm the one who analyzed the cake and confirmed the presence of sedatives. Martin sat back down, clearly shaken. Martin, Richard continued, we have proof the cake was poisoned. We have the baker's testimony about the calls she received, and we have the phone number used to make the threats. What number? Richard noticed Martin had taken the bait. You shouldn't know what number, Martin, unless it's yours. Martin stayed silent for a few seconds, clearly trying to think of a way out. Richard, I can explain. Then explain. Martin took a deep breath before speaking. There's a group of investors interested in buying construction companies in the New York City metro area. They offered me a hefty commission if I could broker the sale of your company. And how does poisoning fit into that? The idea wasn't to poison anyone. It was just to make you all sick so you'd have to cancel work commitments next week. Richard couldn't believe what he was hearing. Martin, the amount of sedative in that cake could have killed my daughter. I didn't know. The person who gave me the liquid said it was just to make people sleepy. Edward looked visibly shocked. Martin, I can't believe you did this. We've been partners for 2 years. Edward, I was drowning in debt. I needed that money. Richard forced himself not to lunge at Martin. Who are these investors, Martin? A group called Horizon Builders. They want to consolidate the market in the region. Richard knew Horizon Builders. It was a mid-sized company that had grown rapidly in recent years by buying smaller firms. And who's your contact there? A guy named Andrew Rogers. He's their director of expansion. Martin, you do realize what you did is a crime, right? Richard, I can make it up to you. I can give you all the details about their plan. What plan? They don't just want your company. They have a list of others they want to buy, and if the owners refuse to sell, they use other methods to force the sale. Christopher, who had been recording everything, asked, what other methods? Sometimes they cause trouble with suppliers. Other times they spread rumors about financial trouble. In your case, Richard, since you're so respected in the industry, they needed something more drastic. Richard felt disgusted by the man in front of him. Martin, how many other companies have been hurt by these people? At least 3 in the last 6 months, but it was never as serious as what they planned for you. Edward, clearly disappointed, asked, Martin, is our company on their list too? No, Edward, our company is too small to interest them. Richard stood up. Martin, you're going to give me every detail about Horizon Builders. Names, phone numbers, addresses, everything. And if I give you that information, you won't turn me into the police? Martin, you tried to poison my 15-year-old daughter. Of course I'm turning you in, but if you cooperate, maybe your situation won't be as bad. Martin seemed to realize he had no choice. Fine, I'll give you everything I have. Martin pulled out his phone and started showing messages he'd exchanged with Andrew Rogers. Richard took pictures of everything with his own phone. Martin, where did you get the sedative? Andrew gave it to me. He said it was a natural relaxant and wouldn't harm anyone. And you believed that? I wanted to believe it. I really needed the money. Richard shook his head, stunned by Martin's recklessness. How much were they paying you? $200,000 if I got you to sell your company below market price. And if you failed, they said they'd find other ways to get what they wanted. Richard realized the situation was even more serious than he had imagined. If Horizon Builders was truly willing to poison people to acquire businesses, other families could be in danger. Martin, do you have any proof that Andrew was the one who gave you the sedative? I have some WhatsApp messages where he talks about the special ingredient he was going to give me. Show me those messages. Martin showed him the conversations, which confirmed his involvement with Andrew Rogers. Richard took photos of everything. Christopher, do you think we have enough evidence? I believe so, Mr. Richard. With the recorded conversation, the phone messages, and the cake analysis results, we have a solid case. Richard turned to Edward. Edward, I'm so sorry your partner got involved in this. Richard, I'm a victim here too. I had no idea what Martin was planning. I know, Edward. None of this is your fault. Richard looked at Martin, who was visibly remorseful. Martin, we're going to the police station now. You'll repeat everything you said here to the authorities. Richard, what if those Horizon Builders guys try to retaliate? That's exactly why we need to involve them too. They can't keep doing this to other families. Richard, Christopher, and Edward accompanied Martin to the nearest police station. Richard brought all the evidence, the cake samples analyzed by Christopher, the recorded conversation, the photos of Martin's phone messages, and the testimony of the baker, Karen. The officer in charge, Dr. Smith, listened carefully to the whole story. Mr. Richard, this is truly serious. We'll open an investigation immediately. Martin gave his statement, confirming everything he'd said in the office. Richard also gave his account, detailing everything from the moment Michael warned him at the bakery. Dr. Smith, Richard said, I'm worried about the safety of the baker, Karen, and her son. They might try to retaliate against her for cooperating. We'll arrange protection for her and her family, and we'll investigate Horizon Builders to see if there are other victims. The process at the station took nearly 3 hours. By the time they left, it was already late afternoon. Richard, Edward said, I'll have to dissolve my partnership with Martin. I can't keep working with someone capable of this. Edward, you did the right thing, and if you need anything, you can count on me. Richard drove Christopher home and then went to pick up Emily from school. On the way, he thought about how to tell his daughter what had happened. When Emily got in the car, she was beaming. Dad, all the girls at school are talking about my party. It was absolutely perfect. Richard smiled, thinking how that happiness could have turned into tragedy. Sweetheart, I need to tell you something about what happened yesterday. What is it, Dad? Richard shared a simplified version of the story, trying not to scare Emily with the graver details. Dad, are you saying someone wanted to hurt us? Unfortunately, yes, honey, but it's all taken care of now. What? About Michael, the boy who warned you about the cake. Michael is a hero. If it weren't for him, things could have been much worse. Emily was thoughtful for a moment. Dad, I want to meet Michael. I want to thank him in person. Of course, sweetheart. We'll arrange to meet him and his brother. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. On Monday, Richard got a call from Officer Dr. Smith. Mr. Richard, we have updates on the case. What updates? We've managed to locate Andrew Rogers from Horizon Builders. He was arrested this morning and is cooperating with the investigation. Great. And what did he say? He confirmed the scheme of forced company buyouts. According to him, Horizon Builders has been using these methods for over a year. And how many companies were affected? From his testimony, at least 8 construction firms in the metropolitan area. Some sold their businesses after receiving threats. Others were harmed in different ways. Richard Parker was outraged to learn so many families had been hurt. Dr. Smith, will these other business owners be notified? Yes, we'll reach out to all of them. Some already suspected they'd been sabotaged but had no proof. What about Horizon Builders? We're investigating the entire company. It seems the top executives weren't aware of the methods Andrew was using, but that's still being verified. Richard hung up, relieved the scheme had been uncovered. At least other families wouldn't suffer like he and Emily had. That afternoon, Richard went to Sweet Charm Bakery to speak with Karen and Susan. He found them organizing pastries at the counter. Mr. Richard, Karen said, how are things? Karen, it's all settled. The person who forced you into this was arrested along with others involved. Karen burst into tears of relief. Thank you so much, Mr. Richard. I was terrified they'd come after me again. They won't. And you won't have trouble with the police either. The detective understood you were a victim. Susan approached them. Mr. Richard, I want to apologize for what happened at my bakery. I'm so sorry Karen was forced into this. Mrs. Susan, you're not to blame. And I'd like to keep buying cakes here. You make the best pastries in town. Karen smiled for the first time since Richard had met her. Mr. Richard, may I ask how your daughter is? Emily's doing well. In fact, she wants to meet you, and thank you for helping uncover the truth. I'd be honored to meet her. Richard arranged to return the following Saturday with Emily to personally thank those who'd saved her party. On Wednesday, Richard received another call from Detective Dr. Smith. Mr. Richard, the case is practically closed. Martin Sullivan and Andrew Rogers will face charges for attempted poisoning and racketeering. What about Horizon Builders? The company will pay heavy compensations to all victims, but the top executives truly didn't know about the scheme. Andrew acted alone to secure promotions. Richard was satisfied justice would be served. Dr. Smith, what about Michael, the boy who warned me about the cake? Ah, yes, the young hero of the story. What about him? I'd like to do something to thank him for his courage. If not for him, my daughter could have... Richard couldn't finish. Mr. Richard, in our experience, the best gratitude is ensuring Michael's story has a happy ending too. How so? Talk to him. Learn his dreams, his family's needs. Sometimes a job or education opportunity can change a person's entire life. Richard thought it was an excellent idea. On Saturday, Richard took Emily to the bakery for the arranged meeting. They arrived around 2 in the afternoon and found Michael sweeping the floor. "Michael," Emily said, "finally, I get to meet my hero." Michael blushed but smiled. "Hi, Miss Emily, how was your party?" "It was perfect, Michael. And it was perfect because you had the courage to tell my father what you saw." Karen and Susan came over to greet Emily. "Emily, you're even more beautiful than your father described," said Karen. "Thank you so much, Karen. And thank you for helping uncover the truth, even when you were afraid." Richard watched the scene with satisfaction. It was good to see all these people who had been through such difficult times now chatting so casually. "Michael," Richard said, "can I speak with you privately?" "Of course, Mr. Parker." They stepped slightly away from the others. "Michael, I want to do something to thank you for what you've done for us. Can you tell me a little about your family, about your dreams?" Michael was moved. "Mr. Parker, I only did what I thought was right. You don't have to give me anything." "Michael, I really do. If it weren't for you, my daughter could have been seriously hurt." Michael thought for a moment. "Mr. Parker, I've always wanted to study. I stopped going to school when my mother got sick and I had to work to help at home." "How old are you, Michael?" 12, sir. "And how is your family situation now?" "I live with my grandmother. My mother, she passed away last year." Richard's heart tightened as he realized Michael was an orphan. "And your father?" "I never knew him, sir." Richard looked at the brave boy who had saved his daughter and decided he would do something meaningful to change his life. "Michael, would you like to go back to school?" "I'd love to, Mr. Parker, but my grandmother needs me to work to help with expenses." "What if I could arrange for you to study while still making sure your grandmother gets help with the bills?" Michael's eyes lit up. "That would really be possible, sir." "Of course it would. You saved my daughter, Michael. It's the least I can do." Richard returned to where Emily, Karen, and Susan were standing. "Emily, how would you feel about helping Michael go back to school?" "Dad, I'd love to. Michael deserves every opportunity in the world." Susan joined the conversation. "Mr. Parker, if I may suggest, there's a very good school nearby with a program for at-risk youth." "Which school?" "Walt Whitman Public School. They offer full scholarships, free school supplies, and even extra meals." Richard wrote down the school's name. "And could Michael still help here at the bakery when he's not in school?" "Of course," Karen said. "Michael is a very responsible boy." Richard turned to Michael. "What do you think, Michael? Should I go talk to the school to enroll you?" Michael was nearly in tears. "Mr. Parker, I don't know how to thank you. Michael, you've already done more for my family than I could ever repay." Emily stepped closer to Michael. "Michael, I want us to be friends. And I want to keep up with your studies, see how you're doing in school." "It would be an honor, Miss Emily." Richard arranged with Michael to visit the school on Monday to handle enrollment. He also decided to speak with Michael's grandmother to explain the situation and make sure she was comfortable with the change. On Sunday, Richard went with Emily to Michael's home in a modest neighborhood in Queens. The house was small but well kept. Michael's grandmother, Mrs. Mary, was a kind and warm 70-year-old woman. "Mr. Parker, Michael told me what you want to do for him. I don't know how to thank you. Mrs. Mary, your grandson saved my daughter. I'm the one who should be thanking you. Michael has always been a special boy, very smart, always loved to read. Emily moved closer to Mrs. Mary. You don't have to worry, I'll take care of Michael like he's my little brother. Mrs. Mary began to cry with emotion. You're angels God sent into Michael's life. Richard discussed the practical details with Mrs. Mary. He decided he would give her an allowance so that Michael wouldn't have the pressure of needing to work to support the household. Mrs. Mary, Michael will keep helping at the bakery after school, but only if he wants to. And if his grades are good, I'll help him get into a good college when he finishes high school. Michael, who was listening to the conversation, couldn't believe the turn his life was taking. Mr. Richard, I promise I'll work really hard in school. Michael, I know you will. You've already proven you're a person of strong character. On Monday, Richard went with Michael to Walt Whitman Public School. The principal, Principal Helen, greeted them warmly. Mr. Richard, it's a pleasure to welcome Michael to our school. From what you've told me, he's a very special young man. Principal Helen, Michael had to stop studying due to family circumstances, but he's very bright, so I'm sure he'll excel here. The enrollment was completed quickly. Michael would start school the following Monday in the 7th grade. Michael, Principal Helen said, you'll have to put in some extra effort to catch up since you've been out of school for a while, but we'll give you all the support you need. Principal, I'll work really hard. I know I can do it. Richard left the school feeling fulfilled. He had managed to turn a terrible situation into something positive for everyone involved. In the weeks that followed, Richard kept a close eye on Michael's progress in school. The boy adjusted quickly and soon became one of the top students in his class. Emily made sure to visit him at least once a week at the bakery, always asking about his grades and helping with homework when needed. Christopher, Michael's brother, also benefited indirectly from the situation. Richard secured him a promotion at the lab where he worked, recognizing his competence and honesty. Karen went back to working normally at the bakery, now free from the fear she had carried during those difficult days. Richard remained a regular customer, always making a point to greet her and ask about her son, Gabriel. 2 months after the events, Richard received a call from Detective Smith. Mr. Richard, I have good news about the case. What news? Martin Sullivan and Andrew Rogers have been convicted. Martin got 3 years of semi-open detention, and Andrew got 5 years in a closed facility. And the other victims of Horizon Builders. They've all received substantial compensation. Several businesses that were forced to close have been able to reopen with the settlement money. Richard was satisfied to hear justice had been served. Detective Smith, thank you so much for your dedication to solving this case. Mr. Richard, it's our duty. And cases like this remind us why we chose to work in public safety. That evening at dinner, Richard told Emily about the conviction of the guilty parties. Dad, I'm glad they were punished, but I'm even happier knowing other families were helped. Emily, this case taught me a lot about the importance of paying attention to the people around us. What do you mean, Dad? If Michael hadn't had the courage to tell me what he saw, or if I hadn't taken him seriously, the consequences could have been terrible. Emily reflected on her father's words. Dad, I want to do more to help people like Michael. What kind of things? I'm not sure yet, maybe volunteer work or helping kids with their studies. Richard smiled, proud of his daughter's compassion. Emily, you can do that, and when you decide which path you want to take, I'll support you all the way. 3 months later, Michael was fully adjusted to school and earning the highest grades in his class. His English teacher was impressed by his essays and encouraged him to participate in literary contests. Emily, inspired by Michael's story, decided to volunteer at a non-profit that helped underprivileged children with tutoring. Every Saturday morning, she would teach math and English to elementary school children. Richard watched with pride at the positive change that terrible experience had brought to everyone involved. His relationship with Emily grew even stronger, and he learned to cherish every moment they spent together. The Sweet Charm Bakery became a weekly gathering spot for the entire family that had formed from those events. Every Saturday afternoon, Richard, Emily, Michael, Christopher, Karen, and Susan would meet for coffee and conversation. They were simple gatherings, but they meant a great deal to everyone. Michael shared updates about his progress in school. Emily talked about her volunteer work. Christopher shared news from the lab, and Karen always had a special treat to offer. During one of these gatherings, Michael made a special announcement. "Everyone, I have some news to share." They all turned their attention to him. "I was selected to participate in a citywide essay competition among public schools in New York City." Emily clapped her hands, moved. "Michael, that's wonderful. I'm sure you'll do great." "Michael," Richard said, "no matter the outcome, I'm already proud of you. Mr. Parker, if I achieve anything, it's because you believed in me when no one else did." Richard was touched by Michael's words. That boy, whom he had met during one of the worst moments of his life, had practically become part of the family. On the day of the essay competition, the whole family went to cheer for Michael. The event was held at a public school in downtown New York City, with participants from over 50 public schools. The essay topic was courage and solidarity in everyday life. Michael smiled as he read the prompt, thinking about how his own life was an example of that very theme. He wrote a moving essay about the importance of doing the right thing even when afraid, using examples of ordinary people. He knew who had shown courage in difficult times. The results came out 2 weeks later. Michael placed second among all participants, and his essay was published in the city newspaper as an example of excellence. "Michael," Emily said when they heard the news, "you're a born writer." "Emily, when I grow up, I want to study journalism. I want to tell stories about people who make a difference." Richard stepped closer to Michael. "Michael, when it's time to choose a college, we'll find the best journalism school in New York City for you." 6 months after the events of the Sweet 16 party, Richard received an unexpected offer. A major construction company, different from Horizon Builders, made a legitimate bid to buy his business. The offer was financially very attractive, but Richard hesitated to accept. Parker Construction was his life's work, built over 15 years of hard effort. During one of their bakery meetups, Richard decided to ask his friends for advice. "Everyone, I need your counsel." "What kind of advice, Mr. Parker?" Karen asked. Richard explained the buyout offer. "The deal is really good, but I'm unsure if I should take it." "Dad," Emily said, "you always told me the company was your dream." "That's true, Emily, but I also think it might be time to make room for other important things." Michael, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. "Mr. Parker, can I share my thoughts?" "Of course, Michael. You always taught me that the most important things in life aren't the ones money can buy. You have a company that provides jobs for so many people, that builds homes for families to live in. That's priceless." Richard was struck by Michael's mature response. "Michael, do you think I shouldn't sell?" "I think you should follow your heart, but I also think you could find a way to have more time for your family without selling the company." Emily brightened at Michael's suggestion. "Dad, you could promote some employees to higher positions and delegate more responsibilities." Richard smiled, realizing his daughter and Michael were right. "You're both correct. I'll turn down the offer and restructure the company to have more free time." Susan, who had been listening, added her thoughts. "Mr. Richard, you already have a beautiful family and true friends. With more free time, you can cherish these blessings even more." Richard made the decision not to sell the company, but to reorganize its management for a better quality of life. He promoted his lead engineer to operations director and hired an experienced manager to handle finances. With these changes, he reduced his daily workload from 12 to 6 hours, gaining more time to spend with Emily and watch Michael grow. A year after the events of the Sweet 16 party, Richard organized a special celebration to mark the first anniversary of their friendship with the entire family that had formed. The party was held in his backyard, the same place where tragedy would have struck if not for Michael's bravery. Present were Emily, Michael, Christopher, Mrs. Mary, Michael's grandmother, Karen, Gabriel, Karen's son, Susan, and Edward. "Everyone," Richard said, raising a glass of soda for a toast. "Exactly 1 year ago, we experienced one of the scariest moments of our lives, but we also discovered the strength of friendship and solidarity." Everyone raised their glasses. "Michael," Richard continued, "your courage didn't just save my daughter. It brought together everyone here today." Michael, now 13 and visibly more mature, replied, Mr. Richard, I just did what I thought was right, but I'm grateful every day for finding a family that welcomed me with so much love. Emily stepped closer to Michael. Michael, you're not just my friend. You're my brother in heart. Karen, moved, spoke up. Mr. Richard, Miss Emily, you've changed our lives. Gabriel now has proof that honesty and courage are worth it. Gabriel, Karen's 10-year-old son, said, "When I grow up, I want to be, like Michael, brave and smart." Christopher, who had received a significant promotion at the lab, thanked him. "Mr. Richard, thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself. I'm now the lab supervisor." Mrs. Mary, visibly emotional, said, "Mr. Richard, Miss Emily, you restored hope to an old woman who thought she had nothing but sorrow left." Edward, who had rebuilt his business after parting ways with Martin, added, "Richard, this year taught me that true friends show up in the hardest times." Susan, who had expanded her bakery and hired more staff, said, "Mr. Richard, after everything that happened, our bakery became a gathering place for people who believe in human kindness." Richard looked around at all the people who had become so important in his life because of what could have been a tragedy. "Emily," he asked, "what did you learn from all this?" Emily thought for a moment before answering, "Dad, I learned that life can change completely in just a few seconds. But I also learned that there are always good people willing to help when we need it. And what about you, Michael? What did you learn?" "Mr. Richard, I learned that doing the right thing is worth it, even when we're afraid. And I learned that family doesn't have to be just by blood." Richard smiled, proud of the two young people's answers. "I learned that angels exist, and sometimes they appear in the form of a 12-year-old boy with the courage of a giant." The party went on into the night, filled with conversation, laughter, and stories. Richard watched Emily playing with Gabriel and Michael, helping Mrs. Mary serve herself to the treats, thinking about how life had taken a much better turn than he could have ever imagined. 2 years later, Michael was graduating from middle school with the highest grades in his class. He had won 3 essay contests and was already being sought after by several high schools. Emily was in her sophomore year and had decided she wanted to study psychology to work with vulnerable children. Christopher had been promoted to general, lab coordinator, and was pursuing a postgraduate degree in clinical analysis. Karen had opened her own bakery in partnership with Susan, and business was thriving. Richard's company continued to prosper, but now he only worked part-time, dedicating his afternoons to family and friends. At Michael's middle school graduation party, Richard gave an emotional speech. "Michael, when I first met you, you were a brave boy working in a bakery. Today you're a brilliant young man about to start high school. But what makes me proudest is knowing you've kept your essence, the courage to do what's right." Michael, visibly moved, replied, "Mr. Richard, everything I've achieved is because you believed in me, and I promise I'll keep making you proud." Emily stepped up to the microphone. "Michael, you'll always be my hero, and I can't wait to see the famous journalist you'll become." After the ceremony, everyone gathered at Karen and Susan's bakery for a special celebration. The cake had been made especially by Karen, with all the care and love she put into her creations. "Karen," Richard said, "this cake is delicious, and the best part is knowing it was made with love and honesty. Mr. Richard, every cake I make now is my way of thanking life for the second chance it gave me." Michael, who was about to turn 15, made a special announcement. "Everyone, I have some news." All eyes turned to him. "I've been accepted to Dalton Academy with a full scholarship for high school." The celebration was immediate. Dalton Academy was one of the best private schools in New York City. "Michael," Emily said, "that's wonderful. Now you'll have even more opportunities." "Emily, I promise I'll make the most of every opportunity to become a better person." Richard walked over to Michael. "Michael, I'm so proud of you. And when it's time for college, we'll find the best journalism program in the country." 3 years had passed since the events of Emily's Sweet 16. Michael was now a sophomore in high school and remained one of the top students in his class. Emily was a senior and had been accepted into Columbia University's psychology program. Richard had found the perfect balance between work and personal life, and his company continued to grow sustainably. During one of their weekly gatherings at the bakery, Richard made a special proposal. "Everyone, I've been thinking of a way to preserve our story." "What do you mean, Dad?" Emily asked. "Michael always wanted to be a journalist, right? What if he wrote our story to be published?" Michael was thrilled by the idea. "Mr. Richard, it would be an honor to tell our story. But she wasn't finished yet." "That's true, Michael, but we can share what we've already lived and leave the ending open for the future." Emily loved the idea. "Michael, you could write about the importance of courage and solidarity. Our story might inspire others." Christopher suggested, "Michael, you could reach out to some newspapers to see if they'd be interested in publishing the story." Susan and Karen offered to help with the details about the bakery and everything that happened during those difficult days. Michael spent the next few months writing a detailed article about the entire experience. The piece turned out moving and well-structured, showcasing all the journalistic talent he was developing. When he finished, Michael took the article to Richard for review. "Michael, this is incredible. You've captured not just the facts, but also the emotions we all went through. Thank you, Mr. Parker. Writing about our story made me realize even more how all our lives changed for the better." Richard helped Michael send the article to several newspapers and magazines. After a few weeks, they received a positive response from American Family magazine, which wanted to publish the story in their special edition on solidarity. When the magazine came out, the story of Richard, Emily, Michael, and all the others sparked a wave of positive reactions. Many people wrote letters sharing similar stories of how small acts of courage had changed their lives. Michael became known at school as the young journalist, and several teachers encouraged him to enter more prestigious writing competitions. Emily decided to base her high school senior project on the impact of solidarity on youth character development. Using her own experience as the foundation, Richard realized the publication had closed an important chapter in their lives. What began as a moment of terror had turned into a life lesson now being shared with thousands. During their last weekly gathering at the bakery before Emily left for college, Richard shared a special reflection. "Everyone, when I think about everything we've been through together, I realize the most important thing wasn't the danger we faced, but the friendships we built." Michael, now 16 and showing the maturity of a young adult, replied, "Mr. Parker, I've learned that life's greatest treasures are the people we love and who love us back." Emily, about to start a new chapter, said, "Dad, Michael, everyone, you've taught me that family goes far beyond blood. You're my chosen family." Karen, who had become a successful businesswoman, thanked them once more. "Mr. Parker, Miss Emily, you turned one of the worst moments of my life into the greatest blessing I've ever received." Christopher, now running the lab, added, "Richard, your generosity didn't just change Michael's life, it changed our whole families." Mrs. Mary, at 73, more vibrant and happy than ever, said, "My dears, you've given me the most precious gift a grandmother could ask for, seeing my grandson achieve his dreams." Susan, who had become a respected business owner in the neighborhood, concluded, "This bakery has become a symbol that kindness always triumphs over evil." Richard looked around at all these people who had become essential to his life and felt overwhelming gratitude. Everyone, what started with one brave boy whispering crucial information turned into the greatest life lesson I've ever received. In that moment, Richard understood the true wealth of his life wasn't in business or money, but in the people he'd chosen to stand beside him. Michael was about to become a talented journalist. Emily was going to study to help others. Christopher had built a solid career. Karen fulfilled her dream of owning her own business, and Mrs. Mary had the joy of seeing her grandson thrive. They were all better people for having known each other, and their lives were intertwined in a way that could never be undone. When they left the bakery that night, Richard looked back and saw Michael helping Mrs. Mary into the car. Christopher was driving, Emily chatting excitedly with Karen about college, and Susan organizing the last things at the bakery. It was an unconventional family, formed by the most unlikely circumstances, but it was a true family, built on a solid foundation of love, respect, and mutual gratitude. Richard smiled, thinking that if he could go back in time, he wouldn't change a thing, Every difficult moment, every scare, every tear had been necessary to bring them to where they were. The last image he had that night was Michael waving from the car window with that sincere smile that had won him over from the very first day at the bakery. "Sir, she did something with her cake," Michael had whispered that day. Yes, she had done something with the cake, but what had really happened was far greater. Life had done something special with all of them. And this was only the beginning of a long journey of friendship, growth, and achievements that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The end of the story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave your sincere words in the comments. Do you think Richard made the right decisions? We'd love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories.